Here is an illustrated summary of the news. It'll be followed by the latest film of events and happenings at home and abroad.
Good morning, KOS News. This is Ellie Diersing bringing you all the updates and the latest breaking news in our government. Commotion from the fear Americans have of the Communist Party has little but died down. Recently, Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy has been a hot topic of debate due to his claims of communist infiltration in the State Department. This is not the first occurrence of McCarthy's claims. McCarthy has proposed multiple accusations regarding undercover communists in the U.S. After 3 largely undistinguished years in the Senate, McCarthy suddenly gained much attention in February of 4 years ago when he claimed in a speech that he possessed a list of over 200 members of the Communist Party and members of Aspiring who were employed in our U.S. State Department. Although the accuracy of these accusations was not known, the allegations made against the State Department members such as U.S. political advisor Owen Lattimore resulted in the economic destruction and blacklisting of many government employees. Such destruction was achieved through McCarthy's infamous and controversial methods of interrogation, described by many as bullying and completely irrational. Because of this, other members of the Senate have decided to take action. In recent events, Senator Margaret Chase Smith of Maine and 6 fellow Republicans issued a declaration of conscience asserting that because of McCarthy's harsh tactics, the Senate had been debased to a level of forum for hate and character assassination. After having been brought to the attention of the Senate, today a vote was held to determine McCarthy's fate. After reviewing the 46 counts of misconduct charged to McCarthy, the committee reduced the charges to 5 categories: contempt of the Senate or senatorial committee, encouraging federal government employees to violate the law by providing him with classified materials, receipt or use of confidential or classified documents, and abuse of Senate colleagues and abuse of General Ralph W. Swicker during the Army hearings. The Select Committee unanimously recommended that Joseph McCarthy be censured for his actions in 2 of the 5 categories. 1, his refusal to appear before the Subcommittee on Privileges and Elections to answer questions about his personal character, and 2, his conduct on February 18th of this year, when he publicly abused and disgraced General Swicker during his appearance before the Army McCarthy hearings. Those in defense of McCarthy argue that McCarthy should not be censured for his behavior and that a censure vote would interfere with the guarantees of free speech, the First Amendment in our very own United States Constitution. Because of these actions, today the Senate voted drastically, 65-22, to censure McCarthy, describing his behavior as contrary to senatorial traditions.
The raw, harsh, unpleasant fact is that communism is an issue and will be an issue in 1954.
One thing, the senator has been consistent. Often operating as a one-man committee, he has traveled far, interviewed many, terrorized some, accused civilian and military leaders of the past administration of a great conspiracy to turn over the country to communism.
Censure charges against Senator McCarthy hold the spotlight in Washington. Republican Senator Watkins of Utah heads the 6-man bipartisan McCarthy censure jury weighing these major charges: openly defying senatorial committees, encouraging federal employees to break the law, receiving and making public confidential documents, abusing fellow senators, and mistreating witnesses before his subcommittee.
In Wisconsin, McCarthy's once represented state, Mr. Michael Williams, Mr. Robert Davis, Clarice McClellan, and our very own KOS debate moderator have joined to discuss the effects Joseph McCarthy placed on our government and whether or not these effects were necessary for the protection of our nation.
Thanks, Ellie. For the past half a decade, Senator McCarthy made a big name for himself in the political scene. Since the advent of his belligerent political career, Joseph R. McCarthy has made many advances in trying to expose the fellow travelers on the other left wing and loyalty risks. In his famous 1950 speech in Wheeling, West Virginia, McCarthy claimed that he had in his hand a list of 205 communists in the State Department. Following these provocative claims against the State Department, McCarthy turned to his army and launched a barrage of attacks against the officials. In April 1954, the Army retaliated in these hearings and were aired live on television. Furthermore, as of today, December 2nd, the Senate has officially censured Senator McCarthy. Here with us for today's debate, we have experts Michael Williams and Robert Davis. Mr. Williams, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, moderator. I'm glad to be here to support Senator McCarthy and his views. I truly believe that the Soviets have planted spies in our government, and I'm glad that someone finally stood up to this problem and called out these traitors.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Davis, go ahead.
Thank you for having me, moderator. I believe that Senator McCarthy is recklessly endangering the stability of day-to-day American life, and that McCarthy's accusations have no actual basis or evidence in real life.
Thank you. Also with us today, we have a very special guest, Clarice McClellan of the book Fahrenheit 451. She has joined Mr. Davis to speak against Senator McCarthy. Clarice, welcome to the show.
Thank you, moderator. I'm glad to be here to speak my views against Senator McCarthy, though he seems like a somewhat nicer man than some of the firemen I know.
All right, without further ado, let's begin this debate. The elephant in the room is whether or not Senator McCarthy deserves his censure or not.
Personally, I believe that Senator McCarthy did not deserve the Army's censure, and that everyone should at least listen to what Senator McCarthy has to say. Senator McCarthy was a major in the Honorable U.S. Marine Corps during World War II, and was a circuit judge for 3 years before that. McCarthy is not afraid to speak his mind, and with the Soviets and communism in general growing in more and more powerful, this is exactly what we need. Just look at the Korean War and how that played out. That war put us into massive debt.
I know you strongly believe in McCarthy's tactics, but obviously you do not think he's without flaws, correct?
Well,
After the recent exposure of his lies, I believe it is absolutely irrefutable to argue that Senator McCarthy has done anything right in his career.
Mr. Davis, please do not interject while Mr. Williams is trying to speak.
okay then. Well, I can see why people oppose him due to his belligerent, loud manner of getting his point across, and it is no secret that he is known to pour a couple glasses for himself. But by day's end, McCarthy is an American patriot that only wants to see America prosper, and not collapse from subversive communists. I remember a quote from the great man himself that perfectly sums it up. This will end only when the whole sorry mess of twisted, warped thinkers are swept from the national scene so that we may have a new birth of honesty and decency in government.
Clarice, what do you think about the question?
McCarthy seems like an interesting man. He stands out in our society because he dared to ask questions just like I did in mine. However, I think McCarthy was asking the wrong questions for the wrong reasons. He just wasn't political power and wasn't thinking about the substantial number of people he harmed.
Mr. Davis, do you agree?
Without a doubt, he should have been condemned. The vote in the Senate was not even close. I mean, it was 65 to 22 in favor of censuring McCarthy. With those odds, we shouldn't even be asking this question here. In all honesty, McCarthy should have foresaw this coming, considering the weakening of his support and his overestimating of his own power. As Joseph Welch stated in one of the hearings, "Until this moment, Senator, I think I have never really gauged your cruelty or your recklessness. You have done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you no sense of decency?" The resounding applause from the audience is enough to show the strong disapproval of McCarthy by the masses. I am glad that President Eisenhower had the guts to stand up against McCarthy and challenge his tyrannical, unsupportable claims.
Thank you. We'll now continue on to our second question, starting with Mr. Davis this time. Mr. Davis, do you believe that McCarthy was protecting America when he conducted his investigations and made his accusations?
Senator McCarthy was a man who put his self-interest before the interests of his country. He used Americans' growing paranoia toward communism after the USSR exploded their first A-bomb to his advantage. Simply put, these widely false claims were merely a crude publicity stunt to increase his range of political influence. The false claims of McCarthy would eventually become exposed, as we now know. Senator McCarthy had the nerve to actively attack decorated war veterans of being subversives. In fact, without evidence, he caused 5,000 Americans to lose their government positions. He has no right to call himself an American, much less a protector of the American people. McCarthy was not protecting America. He was merely making them scared of speaking out against him.
Mr. Williams, your turn.
I definitely believe that McCarthy was protecting America, and the proof is all around us. Just look at the case of Whittaker Chambers, who actually admitted to being a former communist spy, and gave us more names of communists in the government. That alone proves that this problem does exist, and the sad truth is that McCarthy was one of the only ones to recognize and raise awareness for this problem. So yes, moderator, I do believe that McCarthy is an upstanding American citizen and did his best to protect the country.
Even though Whittaker Chambers admitted to being a communist, all the others who were accused did not. Accusing innocent people of being communists is not protecting America. People are living in fear of being called a communist in this society. In this society, everyone has to think about their every move so they are not accused of being a communist. One of my favorite broadcasters, Edward R. Murrow, once said, "We cannot defend freedom abroad if we desert it at home."
Thank you, Clarice. Our next question is as follows. What do you think lies in the future for Senator McCarthy and America as a whole after what we have witnessed today?
Now that Americans have a clear understanding of the communist threat that is not blown out of proportion by McCarthy's wild claims, I hope that they can freely express their individual thoughts. Best case scenario is that Americans will no longer live in fear that their every action might cause them to be called communists. Communism is what we are trying to avoid, but ironically people like McCarthy are making society more uniform and unthinking. I have faith that our government will steer us in the right direction, but who knows?
Mr. Williams, your turn.
Well, moderator, I believe that America is in for some dark times now that the army has ruined Senator McCarthy's career, since he was the only one bold enough to stand against the communists. Now that he's gone, no one can predict what the USSR will do. Their spies will definitely continue to feed important American secrets to their government, like the Rosenbergs did with Los Alamos. Worst case scenario, the USSR gathers enough information to make a move on us, and I don't know you, but I do not want World War III. I also feel very sorry for Senator McCarthy himself, as his career is ruined because the United States didn't know how to handle a whistleblower.
Mr. Davis, how do you feel after hearing what Mr. Williams has to say?
To some extent, I agree with what Mr. Williams has said. Communism is indeed a threat that our political figures should actively try to fight against. But for McCarthy, simply put, his career is done for. After the censure, there is no way in heck McCarthy will be re-elected for another term as Wisconsin senator. Thank God. I wouldn't be surprised if he continued to drink until his heart fails him. Unfortunately, I think the American people will continue to use McCarthy as an example for all political figures, causing a schism between the people and our government. McCarthy and his antics have made women's suffrage and civil rights communists in the eye of many conservatives. Even though McCarthy's career is over, his influence on Americans will be felt for years to come. I suspect that civil rights will be postponed for many years due to the persistent fear of communism.
After the communist expansion in Asia by the USSR, do you think there are anti-communist hysteria occurring in America? Furthermore, do you think that we are in danger of the Reds possibly taking over our country and that this rivalry turning into a full-fledged war?
We now know the devastating, gruesome effects of what a full-fledged war between the free world and communism can result in. In a mere 3 years, nearly 5 million civilians and military personnel perished in the Korean War. Both the Reds and us fully understand the consequences of a huge conflict. Admittedly, there is animosity, but even the Soviets are not foolish enough to fight us in anything other than a proxy war. That's why in 1952, former President Truman engaged in peace talks and eventually led to our armistice by dividing Korea along the 38th parallel. The US and the USSR will most likely continue to build up nuclear arms to solidify their power in the regions that they currently influence. But it is highly unlikely that either side will become desperate enough to actually use them. In fact, I believe America is in greater danger of harming itself. The loyalty programs established by Truman in 1947 have been updated by Eisenhower as of last April. They now extend to all civil service jobs and are more stringent and prevent a target from having an actual hearing. In addition, as of last year, screenings now have been extended to those employed by all international organizations, and public universities mandate loyalty oaths. I would like to end this debate with a famous quote from the late great FDR. The only thing to fear is fear itself. Thank you.
This country is in grave danger of a communist takeover. I mentioned World War III earlier, and that reality is much closer than you think. With countries like China becoming communist, and with others like Cuba and North Korea having communist leanings, the danger of the domino effect reaching the US is very real. Our only hope is to elect and support good, distinguished politicians to fill the role McCarthy left in the government, like Senator Pat McCarran or Roy Cohn. Thank you.
I think that this country is in danger. McCarthy is not stopping any real Reds. He's making the American people worried and angry. A war could very easily become a result of these actions.
Thank you for tuning in to KOS and listening to this debate. See you all next time.
Now time for a short commercial break.
The way to find a communist is the following. They openly say they are a communist. They are a communist. If someone is reading Marx or Lenin, they are a communist. If a person supports organizations such as civil rights, they may be a communist. If someone defends a communist teaching, they are a communist. If they openly wear clothes with communist symbols, they are probably a communist. If someone does all of these, they are definitely a communist. Communist infiltration is a serious issue. If you see something, say something. Don't let the Soviets corrupt our society from within.
That's all for our newscast. Now on to individual self-reflections.
Hey Nina,
Hi.
what is a quote that is meaningful to you from this year?
The quote that's meaningful to me from this year is from Pico della Mirandola in Renaissance Humanism, which was, "I have made you neither heavenly nor earthly, either mortal nor immortal, so that like freedom and sovereign artificer you might mold and fashion yourself into the form you yourself shall have chosen." I chose this because it's important to me, so I can choose my own fate and destiny.
Fun. Think back to your first day in Humanities. What were your thoughts, fears, or concerns?
Thinking back to the first day of Humanities, I was kind of scared due to the rumors of upperclassmen and my brothers, and I kind of feared that since the class was so big, I wasn't going to be able to ask questions or talk to either of you at all throughout the year. And yeah, I just wouldn't be able to talk. But now, being in present time, I think that the class size is still kind of intimidating, but I think I'm able to ask questions and talk in front of them.
Okay. Explain an individual strength in this class and how you have cultivated this strength in our class.
A strength I was able to have all year and really help me was my organization. And especially right now, since finals are coming up, it's really important, and it really helps because I'm able to find stuff pretty easily because I'm so organized.
Explain an individual weakness in this class and how you have grown this weakness.
A weakness that I have found myself is my reading comprehension, because since we read so many books in class, because it is an English and social studies class, since we read so many books, it takes me a longer amount of time than it takes somebody else to get through the same amount of a book. So it really kind of sets me far behind because I have to work double the amount for somebody else.
Who do you want to be the most like and why?
Somebody I would want to be most like is Clarice from Fahrenheit 451. I would want to be like her because she has a positive outlook on everything around her, even though she lives in a dystopian society. And this is important to me because she's also able to be friends with even a hated person who's a firefighter and nobody really liked him. But she was able to look past that and she was able to be friends with him.
Any final thoughts?
See you later. Hey, Ellie.
Yo.
So, choose a quotation from the year that is meaningful to you and explain how and why it is meaningful.
Okay, my favorite quotation from this year is from our Perspectives unit in the Other West War reading. This quote is spoken to author Wesley Moore at Valley Forge by Colonel Murphy. The quote states, "When it is time for you to leave this school, leave your job, or even leave this earth, you make sure you work hard enough to make sure it mattered you were ever here." This quote stood out to me because it reflects on one of my values in life, the difference you make. I find it true that each and every person makes a difference in this world, and I idolize the people that dedicate their lives to doing so. It is important to me that one day I can say I've made a positive impact on this earth, just as Colonel Murphy states in The Other West Moore.
Nice.
Thanks.
Think back to your first day of Humanities. And what were your thoughts, fears, concern, perspective? And did you have okay, cool. So, continue.
On my first day of Humanities, I was intimidated by the fact that many upperclassmen said Humanities was an extremely challenging class. I didn't know what to expect from Humanities, so I was scared to find out what this class would be like. I was also intimidated by the extra long class periods each day and large class size, which made me anxious that I wouldn't get enough time with the teachers if I needed help. It took me a few weeks to understand how to operate in this class.
Are you feeling different or same?
Although Humanities is a big and busy class, I discovered that it wasn't as intimidating as it was made out to be. Although one-on-one time with the teachers wasn't made available daily, we did get to have multiple checkups on projects like our research essay, which I felt provided very beneficial feedback and helped me to raise my grade. One thing I wish that had happened more that was very convenient to me and other students that are busy outside of school were silent work days, because they created a very quiet environment to study for the upcoming final, and we were able to ask questions if needed.
Explain an individual strength in this class and how you have cultivated this strength in our class.
One strength I feel that was beneficial to me this year was my comprehensive reading skills. Reading and annotating has always been easy for me, and that was extremely helpful in this class because it helped me to understand readings quickly and efficiently, especially since this class uses a lot of articles and books in each unit. As we read more, it was easier for me to understand some of the harder readings, such as the Odyssey and Julius Caesar, that use language that I'm not familiar with.
Explain an individual weakness in this class and how you have grown this weakness in the class.
One weakness that I feel that I strengthened over this course of this year was my organizational skills. In the beginning of the year, I had trouble keeping track of all my readings and multiple handouts in my portfolio. When semester exams came around, it became important to me to know where all my materials were so that I could effectively study and use my resources and notes on open note quizzes. During the year, I learned how to creatively organize my portfolio so that everything was easily accessible and nothing was lost. This is especially important now because our final is also open note.
All right. Who would you want to be most like and why?
One character we were taught about this year that I admire is Odysseus. I want to be like this character because in Homer's epic, The Odyssey, Odysseus faces many challenges. However, he always finds a creative or clever solution to his dilemmas. For example, in Book 9, Odysseus tells Polyphemus his name is Nobody to keep the other Cyclopses from saving Polyphemus when Odysseus attacked and blinded him. I thought this was extremely clever on Odysseus' part because it saved the lives of him and his crew. And later in the chapter, Odysseus escapes the Cyclops by clinging on to the stomach of the sheep unnoticeably, which again shows the clever character traits of Odysseus that I admire.
Alrighty, anything else?
Hi, it's Lauren. I'm going to be filming my personal reflections. Choose a quotation from the year that is meaningful to you. Explain how or why is meaningful using specifics. Pursue your portfolio for inspiration. The quotation that I chose is from the Perspectives packet, and it's, we look at the same stars, the sky in common, the same world surrounds us. What difference does it make? By what pains each seeks the truth. We cannot attain to so great secret by one road, and that's by Symmachus. This is my favorite quote because it's saying that we all live in the same world together, yet we all take such different paths. This is a good thing because without taking different paths, great things can't be achieved, so each individual can achieve something themselves. Second question, think back to your first day in Humanities. What were your thoughts, fears, concerns, and perspective? Did you have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset? Now think about your present day feelings about this class. Are you feeling different, the same? If so, how and why? On the first day of Humanities, I was really nervous. I was very confused as to what the class was because it was both English and social studies. I thought it was going to be completely separate, but it wasn't. I was concerned about keeping up with the work in the beginning. I definitely had a fixed mindset because I knew that I would eventually get the hang of the class and start to understand it more. Now it's the end of the school year. My thoughts on the class have completely changed, and I look forward to coming into class, and the workload was not as challenging to keep up with as I thought because I managed my time well. And third question is explain individual strength in this class and how you have cultivated this strength in our class, and explain individual weakness in this class and how you've grown this weakness in class. And I said an individual strength I have is time management. However, at the start of the year I was not good at this. I'd start my homework at 7 or 8 and not be done until about 10 or 11. But I finally learned how to manage my time better, and that includes starting my homework when I got home from school and not procrastinate as much, so I would finish it earlier. A weakness of mine would be retaining the information. Especially in the beginning of the year, I would say the information but not really understand it. But it got better throughout the year because I became better at annotating things that were important. And the last question Who do you want to be like the most and why? You need to choose someone that we have studied in our class, fictional or historical. Be specific and mention similar specific character traits. Out of all the characters we studied in class, I said I would want to be the most like Clarice. Clarice stood out to me the most because she was not afraid to ask questions and speak her mind. I think this is a good thing to be able to do because she's like able to speak how she really feels about things instead of keeping her thoughts to herself. And Montag, who was also in Fahrenheit 451, kept his thoughts to himself, and that resulted in him getting his house burned down, so it probably wasn't a good thing that he kept to himself. So, yeah, thank you.
Oh hey, I didn't see you guys there. Hi, I'm Eric, and this is my individual reflection. When perusing through the units in search of a quote, I came across Margaret Wheatley's Willing to be Disturbed paper and found an interesting quote. It was, "If we don't listen, things can stay as they are, and we won't have to expend any energy." The paper truly strikes a note with many students from this generation, and in particular, myself. The beauty of being human is that alone we may not be able to accomplish much, but when working in tandem with one another, humans can achieve the impossible. This quote is especially relevant in today's society because we live in an extraordinarily diverse world. Just look at our small community of New Albany. Given my background, I've always placed it upon myself to try to do things independently without aid from others, even if it involves collaboration, as seen earlier this year during the mock election project. I placed and limited myself in the fallacious mindset that my ideas tended to be the best ideas. Looking back at this quote, I realized I was merely being complacent and shallow. The cold hard truth is that nothing will change if we are trapped within our own bubble. The key to self and societal betterment lies within the innovative, different ideas of others, not just our own. By ignoring others in the past, I was afraid of what I heard would be better than what I had originally thought of. More importantly, I was putting myself under the illusion that I was doing more, where in fact, I was taking the easy way out. Ironically, the reasons why I used to avoid listening are now why I relish in it so much. Now on to question 2. It's odd to think that an entire school year has almost elapsed since my first day in the humanities classroom. Coming into humanities in August, it was safe to say I was quite intimidated due to rumors spread around by students from previous years. I was concerned that it would be too large of a time commitment out of class, and in class time would be chock full of dull and monotonous lecturing. Back then, I had a relatively fixed mindset, as seen through my previous answer. From a logical perspective, how could one class be enough to change who I was and who others were based off of the sheer numbers of students in the class? Oddly enough, even in a classroom full of 40 students, I felt as if I was getting plenty of individual attention from the teachers. Nowadays, I feel as if I enjoy the liberal arts more than classes like math and science that I always had a propensity to lean toward. Going into my classes next year, I should have expectations to grow substantially as a student as well as a person. Third question time. A strength that I always prided myself in was my reading and comprehension capabilities. I never had much trouble understanding and digesting what I read. However, humanities had exposed me to entire new genres of reading, such as the Odyssey and Julius Caesar, that put me out of my comfort zone. The advanced word choices and sentence structures that Shakespeare and Homer used confused me, but also piqued my interest. Challenging reads such as these have expanded my vocabulary and helped me as a writer as well. Humanities not only built upon my reading skill set, but allowed me to appreciate a much larger scope of literature. Coming into humanities, I had a plethora of fields of which I could improve. However, my presentational skills stood alone amongst them. Whenever giving a presentation, I felt unnatural and often either forgot my lines or spoke too quickly. I didn't necessarily have a ton of stage fright, but words never sounded right when I presented. Presentations throughout the year, from the midterm exam to the project I did on economic sanctions at the beginning of the year, have slowly but surely made me more comfortable when I present. The extra experience I've gained has helped me rely less on notes and feel more in control when I present. Fourth and final question. This question was perhaps the most difficult out of the 4 because it raises the deeper question of what do we value most in people and in life. After some deep consideration, I decided to aspire to be most like Westmore because of the value he represents. Westmore grew up in unideal circumstances within the crime-ridden suburb of the Bronx, without a father nor a father figure in his life. The finest of margins separated West from other Westmore, yet the outcomes could not have been more disparate. The choice to go to a military academy wasn't even his own, yet if the choice had not been made for him, he might have continued down the hopeless road that he was set on. The important thing, though, was that he didn't. Westmore is currently a decorated Army officer, as well as an astounding author, while other Westmore will be contemplating his actions in a cell for the rest of his life. Westmore is the epitome that small things can make a big difference. His story inspires hope in the eyes of many readers that they will be able to turn their life around. While may not be in the same dire predicament that West was in, I was empowered by his words and felt as if nothing was impossible. West's story can be condensed into one word: resilience. Pondering on the question, I realize what I respect most in someone is that if they can make light in even a dark situation. Thank you. Bye.
Oh, hello. I'm Ajay, and welcome to my self-reflection on this year's Introduction to the Humanities class. You've actually caught me reading one of my favorite works from this year, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola's Oration on the Dignity of Man from 1486. The manifesto features Mirandola's version of God speaking to Adam, who represents all of mankind. The oration was deemed to be so controversial by the Catholic Church that the Pope banned the speech. However, today I just wanted to talk about my favorite quote from this year, which was in the oration. It goes, "You shall have the power to descend to the lower forms of life, which are brutish. You shall have the power, through your own decision, to be reborn into the higher forms, which are divine." This really resonated with me for a multitude of reasons. First of all, I like the story behind the quote and its controversial nature. I found out that the oration actually served as an introduction to Mirandola's 900 Theses and has been called the Manifesto of the Renaissance. However, the main reason I chose this quote is because of how applicable it is in our everyday lives, even though it's been more than 500 years since it was created. The quote talks about how man has the power to determine his own fate, and is not controlled by a predetermined destiny, which, by the way, is an outstanding example of humanism. On a more basic level, though, it's just telling us that we are our own masters, and we can choose to make good life choices to get a better outcome in life, which really resonated with me. On to the next question. My first day of humanities was a mixed bag, to say the least. Since I had the class for the last 2 periods of the day, it gave all the sophomores I knew a chance to regale me with their stories of how utterly terrible the class was. However, I also had some good reviews about humanities from some juniors in my chemistry class. On the first day of humanities, though, I sided more with the sophomores. I thought my teachers were strange and strict, and definitely had a very fixed mindset on the class, as I didn't allow anyone to persuade me otherwise. I was definitely not willing to be disturbed, and that was exactly what humanities was doing to me. However, as the year went on, something changed. The class became more and more enjoyable, and I learned important lessons about myself and life. Though I won't argue that the class does put a heavier workload on an incoming freshman than they might be used to, I actually enjoyed the challenge, and my grades showed that as well. I know for a fact that my mindset on school has changed, and I am more willing to listen to both sides of a topic before judging something, suggesting a growing mindset. Overall, I'm a very different person today than on the first day of school. Now, the next question I found to be interesting, since it asks about my strengths and weaknesses in the class. The first strength that popped into my mind was my love of books. If I find a book or series interesting, I can spend hours reading it and getting to know the world, and humanities has only strengthened that. By giving me interesting works to read, it strengthened my desire to know more about the book or reading, and that showed on my results on the numerous comprehension quizzes we did in class. That, however, is in sharp contrast to my writing skills, which I consider to have grown the least during my humanities career, and are, in my mind, my greatest weakness. The only essay I actually felt good writing this year was the compare and contrast essay, and that was only because of my affinity toward the Odyssey and my knowledge of the Martian. I think that a large part of this problem stems from my tendency to procrastinate, which is definitely something I will work on going into AP Euro next year. The final question was the one I spent the most time pondering, and I finally decided that I wanted to be most like a more recent addition to my humanities encyclopedia, and that is American news anchor Edward R. Murrow. Murrow was born in 1908 to a simple Quaker family, and worked himself up to a position at CBS News, where he stayed for all of his 26-year career. He first came into the limelight for his exceptional reporting during World War II. During the war, he assembled a team of investigative reporters who came to be known as Murrow's Boys, and inspired the fearful masses of Britain and America to join together and support the war effort. However, the trait that I found most important in Murrow was his honesty and integrity, and the American people of the 1950s and 60s seemed to agree. Monroe's skill in telling the truth helped lead to massive changes in the U.S., and even helped bring along the censure of Joseph McCarthy. To me, Monroe just seems like an all-around great individual, and someone for future generations to look up to. Well, that's all the time I have today. It's been a great year, and I hope to use the lessons I learned again next year. Thank you for listening.